Hi, I'm Marja from So Local Stitch Lounge. Today we're going to be making the summer Madras tote, which was designed by Anna Graham from Noodlehead Bags. So here's the supplies we'll be using for this project. You're going to have some linen cotton blend for the exterior, a quilting cotton lining, woven fusible interfacing, some 1-inch wide cotton webbing, one piece of lining fabric that's 2.5 inches wide for the bias binding, thread, and then the basics like rotary cutter and clips and pins, scissors. I also have this ruler that's specifically designed for making box corners. It's really handy. So the first thing we have to do is cut 2 each from the exterior lining and interfacing, 2 pieces each that are 17 inches wide by 16.5 inches tall. So these 2 leftover pieces that are on a fold, we're going to open those up and they will be the pocket. And we're going to cut those to 17 wide, 9 inches tall. We're going to just trim the bias tape down to be the same size as the pocket. And then we'll iron that. So now we're going to take the 2 pocket pieces and lay them right sides facing out, or wrong sides touching, like that. So we're going to have the lining side facing up. This is the top edge. I'm going to open the bias tape that we made with the right side facing the lining. And I'm going to just lay this in here, and we're going to stitch along that first fold. So now I'm going to just press that seam up this way on the wrong side, on the lining side. And when I flip it, then the rest of the binding can fold over to the front, and we're going to stitch it in place close to that fold. I'm going to use lots of pins because I want this to stay in place. I grabbed a tailor's awl, which I'm going to use to help hold that tape in place when we're sewing. I'm going to show you why we sew this on the good side rather than the wrong side, because you want to make sure that your stitching is lined up here. It's really hard, almost impossible to get it perfect if you were doing it from the wrong side. You can see here it goes off the road a little bit here, but it's just inside the pocket, so it's all right. Now we're going to baste the 3 sides of the pocket to hold those two pieces together. Basting is just basically sewing with a bigger stitch, and it's sort of like a temporary hold to keep things together, but it's not the final stitching. So I'm gonna lengthen my stitches a bit. So before we fuse the interfacing to the exterior fabric, it's a good idea to just iron the exterior fabric on its own. You usually have a nicer looking outcome at the end if you do it that way. So you can see that my interfacing is just a little bit smaller than the fabric, which makes ironing it on a breeze because I don't have to worry about the interfacing getting stuck to the ironing board. So the interfacing is on both of the exterior pieces, and now I'm going to put the pocket on the front of one of them. I have a little bit of the selvage edge showing here, but that's totally going to be covered up, so it doesn't matter. Just lining that up, and then we're going to stitch it down on those three sides. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance for this. The final seam allowance is 1/2 inch, so that means our 1/4 inch seam will be covered up. This is just to hold it in place again. So now we're going to draw a line up the center here and sew on it to divide the pocket. A really easy way to find the middle of something if you don't feel like doing math is to just fold it in half, like that. And then in the seam allowance, just take a tiny little clip out of the middle, and then you have a mark in the center that you can see easily from both sides. I'm going to put a pin here just to hold this because the linen does tend to stretch a little bit. So we'll backstitch at the top here for sure. So to get rid of that marker, which is a water-soluble sewing marker, I'm just going to spray it with a bit of water and it disappears. Now we're going to put the two exterior pieces right sides together like this. We're sewing the two sides and the bottom. Now our seam allowance is 1/2 inch, which is 4/8 on my sewing machine. So we've got the exterior sides and bottom sewn, and now we're going to make the box corners. So to do that, pull apart the top opening of the bag so that the two sides seams touch like that, and then you can shake it apart like this and you'll see these triangles form at the bottom. You can fold this like that so that you have the two, and you want to make sure that those seams are lined up so that the side seam is lined up at the bottom seam here, and we're going to be marking and sewing across the corner right here. I'm just going to open the seams a little bit to make that easier. So we're going to measure 2 inches from the point of the corner, and then I can use my box corner ruler. 2 inches from the tip ends up being a 4-inch box corner, and that means 4 inches across here. You mark that. Make sure you clip this so that it doesn't shift before you sew it, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other corner. going to sew across that line. Now we're going to trim the seam allowance down to be about 1/2 inch. Now we're going to put the 2 lining pieces right sides together and sew the 3 sides, the bottom and 2 sides. So remember that the bag is wider than it is tall. So we'll pin these together, and we're going to be leaving an opening in the bottom about 5 inches for flipping the bag later, and I always forget to do that, so I'm going to mark it right now. I'm just taking a guess, 5 inches-ish. Okay. So this is a tip for whenever you're making bag linings, to make your seam allowance slightly bigger in the lower part of your bag so that when you put it inside your bag, it fits just right inside rather than being a little bit too big. So we have to start with the 1/2 inch seam allowance up at the top because that's the seam allowance of the exterior, so it needs to fit. But we're gonna gradually increase the size of the seam allowance to be about 5/8 down here and all across the bottom. And that's gonna make the bag fit better. So that's gonna be my corner, which is a 5/8 corner. But I'm starting at a 1/2 inch. Do the box corners on the lining as well. I'm just going to iron the seams open. I'm going to take my strap and cut it in half so I have 2 equal sides. And we're going to mark the center of the front and back. And I'm going to do it without measuring. Just line up those sides, seams like that. Lay it out flat. I can see the center, and the straps, the handles are supposed to be 5 inches apart. So I'm just going to measure 2.5 inches to each side of that mark on both sides of the bag. I want to be able to see the marks from the inside, from the outside. Let's turn it right side out for now. Take one strap and line up the raw edges with 5 inches apart in the handles. Make sure the strap's not twisted. And now we're going to stitch that in place.
Luna.
The final seam allowance is 1/2 inch, so we're just going to baste about 1/4 inch from the edge, just to hold it in place for now. So now we're going to put the lining and exterior right sides together. I find the easiest way to do this is to have the exterior inside out and the lining right side out. And then we can slide the lining inside here, line up the side seams, and pin that together. The straps should be tucked down inside. Now we can flip it through this base at the bottom. And that's what they call birthing the bag. Now we just need to press the top seam and top stitch it, sew up the hole, and it's done. Now we're going to top stitch around the whole top edge with a slightly longer stitch length. I'm going to bring it to 3. I'm just lining up my foot with the edge of the top, which ends up being about 3. So the last thing we have to do is sew up the bottom hole. So if you press that seam, it'll be a lot easier. You just line up those 2 folds, and we're going to try to sew really, really close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, to close up the hole.